Hello everyone, thanks for joining in this video. This is the first video on my new channel, Present Line Book Club. Make sure to like, share, and subscribe. We're going to talk about books, culture, and all the other things. And in this video, I have prepared a reflection for you on modern literature or modern books and why I think that they poison your soul, that they're not good for you. Now, the major reason why I believe this is because of the way that the modern literature is written. When you look at the way that the classical literature was written, just to make that comparison, to put it into perspective, you go back all the way back to something like this, Homer's Odyssey. The way it was written, in fact, it wasn't written at all. It was said, it was performed, and then it was written down in order to be preserved. But actually, the original poets who performed Homer, obviously they knew the whole epic by heart. They could reproduce it by heart. And what that really means is that the whole work of art was created to be consumed and experienced communally, to be consumed and experienced together with other people. The course of literature throughout centuries has been a solipsism, more and more of it, right? What that means really is that we're starting to get letters, we're starting to get books that are more and more recommended to be or written to be read alone by one or two people. By the time we get novella and Don Quixote and all of that, like medieval period about, we start getting almost solitary reading only. Like people are no longer interested in communally experiencing the work of art, but rather alone. And perhaps the last remnant of that classical tradition is the theater, and the way it was revived in the Renaissance with people like Shakespeare. But eventually that gets pushed away from the mainstream. And by the 18th, 19th century, we get the boom of the novel, realism, and the psychologism, Dostoevsky, Tolstoy, all of these great authors that definitely have a lot of merit. But slowly we're getting pushed more and more away from that communal aspect of literature and art. And eventually by 20th, 21st century, we get to the point where almost virtually none of culture is anymore consumed communally. Most of culture is consumed now in a solipsistic, solitary way. For example, the way we listen to music, the way we play video games, the way we do Netflix and streaming and all of that stuff. It's all in our house. So there's no way to share those experiences, or very limited ways to share those experiences. Now, why I think that's important is probably because half of the actually consuming stories and literature and culture is actually a reflection upon what we have consumed. And perhaps the best way to reflect is to have a conversation right after. And the way we would do that is by having that conversation with either the author himself or people from the audience or friends we came to experience the show with. So that's a great loss in terms of modern literature, just in the terms of the form of the way it's delivered to us. But another problem with it is, of course, the fact that it's also commercial. How should we say it? Books are not written to connect you with something higher, to elevate you, to make you better, to teach you virtue and wisdom. A lot of motivation for writing modern literature is actually just to make money, and it's fine to make money, but that shouldn't be the only reason why we write. And a lot of times, if we write genuine works of art, we can discover markets nobody knew existed before or prior to that. Think of The Lord of the Rings. Nobody knew there was a market for this revivalism mythology. but there apparently was a very silent gap in the market. People wanted something authentic, classically virtuous, and nobody was expressing it because there were no other books like it. And then Tolkien came along and he virtually created the market on his own. So the idea that we should only satisfy the market, we should only write what the market wants, leads to this very dissipated low level of literature where most of the modern books are romance, werewolves, weird sexual fantasies, things like that, things that appeal to the lowest common denominator and not really to anything that can make us better. And so when we put it together with the form that is appealing solipsistically to ourselves and the fact that we're only writing to satisfy the market, we get very bleak landscape of modern literature. And unfortunately, I think that's a very bad thing for the society, because literature has a depth and power to transform you precisely because you're spending so much time with a book, or you're spending so much time with a play, or with even other forms of art, but let's just now keep ourselves to books. It is the value of it is the fact that you need to put the effort to go through it, to engage with it, and ideally to even participate in it if it's a communal effort. Imagine if the modern poet would summon people to come and participate in his book by him telling the book, right? Imagine a modern poet who memorizes his work of art. That's very difficult even to think about, but I think there's a great value to that. It's edifying for the soul, and that makes us better, and it really plants the message of the book deep inside of us. It becomes an experience that's hard to forget. But if you just read one of many modern generic titles, very difficult for them to leave any kind of lasting impression on us. And so even if they are preaching something good, which in most cases they aren't, this becomes a problem. And the final point I want to make about why modern literature is poisoning us is because a lot of modern literature is actually rewriting of ancient myths, ancient stories in ways that are subversive. Of course, that's the consequence of the critical theory. As you know, about 50s or 60s, the last century, we got this movement of critical theory that became the most influential movement in literary criticism. And so what is by default now the approach to interpretation of classical stories is the idea that we need to kind of break them into pieces and analyze them in each part separately, and then apply modern standards to it and just kind of try to disintegrate the story. So you will have, for example, a lot of these feminist titles that rewrite Shakespeare or rewrite classical poems. If you were, or if you are a student of literature at any Western university, you will have read these titles. The Shield of Achilles, for example, that has its own rendition, or all of these different feminist versions of Shakespeare plays, or even classical plays like Antigone. All of them have a goal to disintegrate the patriarchal system of the past and to present in a very different way the story in a different authorial voice, and to say that, you know, all of these stories are up for interpretation because we no longer care what was the intention of the author. We care what the way we perceive the story and the way it affects us, because at the end of the day, who cares about the author? They're long dead. All of these elements, of course, contribute to the fact that we are ultimately very dissatisfied with, at the end of the day, we are left with very bitter feeling in our very bitter taste in our mouth, because we don't get what we ought to get from literature, which is not a criticism, a mere criticism of society, let's say, or a mere destruction of old delusions, but rather a building, an erection of something that is greater than ourselves and that can build us up alongside it. That is Dante's Divine Comedy. That is Shakespeare. That is Dostoevsky. That is Homer. That is all of these great works of art in their original form, is that they are really questioning the great metaphysical topics, and they are providing useful insight that was tested by the test of time, that passed the test of time. So that would be my recommendation to you. Go more for classics and less for modern literature, because for the most part, 99% of the time, modern literature is not edifying. It's not going to transform you to become a better person, but rather just waste your time. And let me know how you feel about it. Could you find some gems yourself in the sea of rubbish, or do you think there's some other redeeming factor to modern literature? In any case, we'll see you in the next video. Every day we're discussing these topics. Do join us by subscribing to the channel. Take care. Have a great day.